So, you want to own a British opium trading house. You're picturing silk waistcoats, teak-paneled offices, silver dollars stacked high on a Canton counting table, fortunes made in a single good season. But you forget the grim reality. June 1839, Human on the Pearl River. Commissioner Lin Zexu spends 23 days dissolving 21,306 chests of opium in lime and salt water. That's the equivalent of 2.9 million pounds of opium. He washes the whole mess out into the estuary. Every single chest in that trench belongs to men who are, by any normal measure, still about to get extremely rich. That's the part the swashbuckling version leaves out. You weren't in the drug trade, you were in the currency business. First, let's correct the idea of the smuggler's den, because the popular assumption is completely wrong. This isn't a handful of pirates working a back alley. The most respectable commercial companies run it in the British Empire. The East India Company itself controls the raw supply. Firms like Jardine Matheson and Dent and Company handle the distribution, and their partners don't end up hiding from the law. They end up in Parliament. William Jardine retired from Canton and bought a country estate in Dumfriesshire. He won a seat in the House of Commons. His partner, James Matheson, bought an entire Scottish island, the Isle of Lewis, and sat in Parliament too. Nobody scrubbing paste off a warehouse floor in Calcutta is thinking of himself as a criminal. He's thinking of himself as a merchant in a trade the company itself licenses and profits from at every stage before the goods even reach China. The only place this business is illegal is the place the product is sold. Everywhere else in the chain. Bengal, Calcutta, London. It's not just legal, it's company policy, debated openly in Parliament and taxed like any other export. Hold on to that. It matters more than it sounds like it should. So what does it cost to get into this? No single tidy number for starting capital survives, the way it might for a shop or a farm. What survives instead is the ratio, and it's an interesting one. A chest of top-grade Bengal opium sold at company auction in Calcutta changes hands for something in the region of 2,000 to 2,400 rupees. Call that somewhere around 23 to 28,000 pounds in today's money. Ship that same chest to the Chinese coast and sell it off a receiving vessel anchored near Canton. It fetches somewhere between 1,300 and just over 2,000 Spanish dollars, the currency the China trade ran on, depending on the grade and the year. That's something like 30 to 46,000 pounds today. Not a small markup. It's the trade's entire reason for existing. One economic historian studying this exact period puts the early margins in the trade as high as 300%. But you don't buy one chest. You buy dozens, sometimes hundreds, on credit, months before you see a penny back. You need a ship or at least the money to charter space on one. Before 1813, you need the East India Company's permission to trade in Asian waters at all. You need a warehouse, a go-down, back in Calcutta. Increasingly, you don't even bother with one on the China side. The smartest operators store the cargo on the ship itself and never let it touch Chinese soil until the moment it's sold. A chest grown in Bengal comes straight off the company's own monopoly. A chest grown further west in the princely states is called Malwa. It never technically belongs to the company at all. Instead, it pays a transit duty as it crosses company territory on its way to a port, somewhere between 400 and 700 rupees a chest. Call it roughly 70 pounds, close to $10,000 in today's money. Whether the company owns the crop outright or just taxes on the way past, it collects either way. One surviving letter gives us a real number to hang all this on. A trader named William Rees writes to his partner about a single run of the ship ferry to the anchorage at Linton Island. The ferry comes back with about 60,000 Spanish dollars in silver from selling most of its Bengal opium and a smaller lot of Malwa. Call that something like 1.4 million pounds today. One ship, one voyage, 60,000 Spanish dollars in a currency you can't spend anywhere it's earned. That last detail is the whole business, and we'll come back to it. You can't run this alone, so who's on the payroll? At the top sit the partners, the men whose names go on the letterhead and who carry the real financial risk. Underneath them, writers and clerks keep the books, because a firm moving this much silver needs paperwork as much as it needs ships. Supercargoes travel with the cargo itself, empowered to buy, sell, and negotiate on the voyage without waiting weeks for instructions from Calcutta. Ship captains run the vessels, which is its own specialized, dangerous job on this particular coastline. And underneath all of them sit the compradors, Chinese intermediaries. They handle local credit, local officials, and local logistics that no Englishman fresh off a boat could manage alone. They speak both languages of this business fluently, the merchants and the smugglers. Every agency house genuinely depends on them. None of the profit lands anywhere near their name. Neither does the credit for keeping a firm's reputation intact in Canton. Then there's the layer nobody in a teak-paneled office ever meets in person. Chinese boat crews, running vessels built for exactly one purpose: speed. Low, fast, and sail hybrids. The trade calls them fast crabs and scrambling dragons. Built to slip through shallow water at night, loaded, armed, and gone before a patrol boat even clears the horizon. Those crews carry the real physical risk of the entire operation for a wage nobody bothered to record. Now walk the chain, because it starts a very long way from any ship. In 1773, the government in Calcutta declares the entire opium output of Bengal a monopoly of the East India Company. That's the root of everything else. Not a private crop grown by ambitious farmers, a state-controlled product from the seed onward. Peasant cultivators grow the poppy under contract to the company, which supervises the harvest and processes the raw sap into standardized cakes at its own factories. The price paid to the grower is fixed by the company too, low enough that growing poppy for the monopoly is rarely anyone's first choice of crop. Those cakes get packed into chests and shipped downriver to Calcutta. There, they're sold publicly at monthly company auctions. A private trader buys his lots there, loads them onto a ship, and sails for the Chinese coast. He doesn't sail into Canton itself. He can't. Opium is banned inside China, and the whole legal foreign trade is squeezed through a narrow, tightly supervised channel called the Canton system. Picture what that looks like on the ground. Foreign merchants live crammed into a single strip of riverfront warehouses outside the city walls, the 13 factories. They're not allowed to bring wives or families, not allowed inside the walled city itself, not allowed to stay past the trading season. Every legal transaction has to run through a small cartel of licensed Chinese merchants, the Kohong, who guarantee your debts and your behavior to the imperial government. A respectable British merchant is curfewed into a few hundred yards of riverbank. He's doing paperwork with the one class of Chinese businessman the emperor trusts to vouch for him. That's the legal side of the operation. The illegal side happens somewhere else entirely. So the ship anchors instead at Linton Island, out in the mouth of the Pearl River, alongside a small fleet of other foreign vessels that never move. Those are the receiving ships, floating warehouses that exist purely to hold opium offshore, permanently out of Chinese jurisdiction. A Chinese buyer in Canton pays silver at a licensed money shop, on streets built for exactly this kind of transaction. In return, he gets a receipt. He carries that receipt downriver, hands it to an agent on one of the receiving ships, and walks away with his chests. The fast crabs and scrambling dragons do the physical work of moving that opium from ship to shore. Timed to the tide, running at night, built to outrun anything the Qing government sends after them. Every piece of this chain is designed around one single problem: keeping the crime as far from the money as the geography allows. So how big does this get, and why now? In 1813, Parliament strips the East India Company of its monopoly on trade with India itself, though the company hangs on to its China tea monopoly a while longer. Private merchants flood into the gap, and opium is the one commodity that reliably pays for itself in Canton. In 1833, Parliament takes the tea monopoly too, and the company stops being a trading company in China. After that, private houses aren't operating alongside the company anymore. They are the trade. You can watch the volume answer the question for you. Around 1800, the whole China trade moves something like 4,200 chests a year. By 1830, it's up past 19,000. By the season before the war breaks out, it's over 40,000. That's not organic growth. It's what happens when you remove the one institution capping how fast a business can scale. Here's where most retellings stop, at the margin. Buy low in Calcutta, sell high off Linton, pocket the difference. That's real money, and nobody's pretending it isn't. But it's also the weakest link in the whole operation because raw cargo trading is volatile. Prices swing hard depending on the year, the harvest, how nervous the Chinese authorities are that season. The real business sits one layer underneath, and what happens to that pile of silver once a trader has it in his hands at Linton. Silver in Canton is, on paper, useless to a British merchant who needs to pay debts and live in Calcutta or London, so he doesn't ship it home. Shipping bullion across 2 oceans is slow, and every mile of it is a mile a privateer or a storm can take it from you. Instead, he hands that silver straight to the East India Company's own office in Canton. In exchange, the company gives him a bill of exchange, a piece of paper promising the same value. It's payable in Calcutta or in London. And here's the part that actually explains why this entire trade exists. The company keeps that silver right where it is, in China. It uses that silver to buy the one thing it desperately needs and can't get any other way: tea. Britain wants Chinese tea by the shipload. China, for decades, wants almost nothing Britain makes in return. That imbalance should be draining silver out of British and Indian treasuries every single year, and for a long time it does. Opium flips the entire equation. It's the one commodity that reliably pulls silver into Canton instead of out of it. The company never has to ship a single extra coin from London. It just waits for opium traders to hand their Chinese silver straight to its own counting house. The drug isn't the product being sold here, not really. It's the mechanism for paying for tea without moving a single bar of bullion across an ocean. You can see the whole operation laid out if you put 2 pieces of paper side by side. The first is the Chinese buyer's receipt, silver handed over at a Canton money shop, redeemable for opium chests out at the Linton anchorage. The second is the trader's bill of exchange, that same silver handed over to the company, redeemable for pounds sterling or rupees, months later and an ocean away. Same silver. 2 completely different pieces of paper, and only one of them is the reason the whole system is built the way it is. The first document moves a drug. The second one moves an empire's accounts. A trader chasing only the first document is playing a commodity game, hostage to price swings and Chinese enforcement. The company, sitting behind the second document, has engineered its way out of the one problem that's been bleeding it dry for a century: a trade deficit with the one country that doesn't want anything it's selling. That's not a side effect of the opium trade. Historians studying the period are blunt about it. It's the actual reason the company tolerates, and effectively sponsors, a trade it never formally puts its own name on. So, what can go wrong running one of these operations? Everything, and the record has the receipts. Start with June 1839, because we already know how it ends. Commissioner Lin Zexu arrives in Canton that spring with direct orders to shut the trade down for good. He pressures the British superintendent Charles Elliot into surrendering the entire foreign stockpile. Elliot hands over 21,306 chests, roughly 3 million pounds of processed opium, all of it now sitting in Chinese hands. Lin doesn't sell it, and he doesn't hoard it as leverage. Picture the scene at Human. Laborers dig trenches straight down to the waterline, then smash the chests open one by one and tip the raw paste into the mud. They flood the trenches with seawater, then stir in slab after slab of lime until the mixture starts to hiss and froth. Officials stand at the edge with ledgers, counting chests against Elliot's own surrendered tally. They make sure not one goes missing into a bribe on the way to the pit. It takes 23 days of this, trench after trench, before the tide finally carries the last of it out into the estuary. Around the same time, Lin writes an open letter addressed to Queen Victoria, asking why a country that bans opium at home allows its merchants to profit from spreading it in China. Whether the letter ever actually reaches the Queen herself is genuinely disputed among historians. Copies circulate, one version reaches London, but nobody can confirm it's ever placed in front of her. It doesn't matter for the outcome. Within months, Britain and China are at war over exactly this trade. Every fortune sitting on those receiving ships is suddenly a legal question instead of a commercial one. 3 years later, the Treaty of Nanking ends the war, and China is the one who pays. Britain wins an indemnity covering every chest destroyed at Human in full, on top of the cost of the war itself. Hong Kong becomes a British colony outright, and 5 more Chinese ports open to foreign trade. Lin Zexu dissolves 21,000 chests to save his country from the drug. The treaty that follows hands the trade exactly what it wanted all along: safer harbors, more ports, and every penny of the loss repaid by the losing side. That's the spectacular disaster, the one everyone's heard of. But it's not the only one. Roll the clock back a decade to Calcutta, where the danger isn't a Chinese commissioner at all. It's leverage. Through the late 1820s, the city's great agency houses function as something close to private banks. Firms like Palmer and Company, Alexander and Company, and Macintosh and Company. They finance opium purchases, indigo planters, government contracts, all of it stacked on credit chains running back to investors in London. Between 1829 and 1834, that entire structure comes apart. Credit from London tightens. Bad loans pile up. Palmer and Company, one of the largest houses in Calcutta, collapses under debts it can no longer service. Alexander and Company and Macintosh and Company go down in the same wave, not long after. Once one great house fails, the bills and guarantees it issued to other firms become worthless overnight, and the panic drags several more houses down with it. Partners who spend the 1820s looking like the wealthiest men in Bengal spend the 1830s liquidating estates to cover debts that will never fully clear. Two very different ways to lose everything: a commissioner with a lime pit or a banker in London who stops answering letters. Neither one shows up as a line item in anyone's ledger until the exact year it does. So, what does a year running one of these operations look like? A good year has your cargo clearing Linton at full price, your silver converting cleanly into a company bill, and no seizures along the way. By the late 1830s, the whole trade is moving something like 40,000 chests a year, worth in the region of 18 million Spanish dollars annually flowing into Canton. That's more than 400 million pounds a year in today's money. This is the scale a well-positioned house drew its margin from. An average year has some of that math go against you. A shipment sells low because the market's glutted that season, or a cargo spoils, or a bribe to a local official eats into the margin you're counting on. You absorb it because the underlying operation, the bill of exchange conversion, still works. The losses are a cost of doing business, not an ending. A bad year is human, or it's Calcutta in 1830. It's your entire stock in a lime pit, or your entire firm's credit evaporating in a single season because somebody else's house fails first. There's no insurance policy for either one. The record simply doesn't offer you a soft landing. Here's the detail that proves the operation outlasts any single disaster. Indian opium revenue flowing to the government alone runs at around 838,000 pounds in 1835. Call that around 90 million pounds today. A decade later, it's past 2 million, past 200 million in today's money. By the late 1870s, it's past 6 million, the better part of 600 million pounds today. Lin Zexu burns 21,000 chests in a single season at Human. 40 years on, the business is roughly 8 times the size it is the year Lin lights the first lime pit. So who actually gets rich off all this? Not the average country trader running one ship and chasing the Calcutta to Linton margin voyage by voyage. Some of them do well. A great many of them, especially after 1829, do not. The real fortunes belong to the houses that stop thinking of themselves as cargo traders at all, and start thinking of themselves as the infrastructure everyone else has to use. By the 1830s, Jardine Matheson and Dent and Company have effectively cornered the receiving ship system. The anchorages, the credit lines, the financing that turns a chest of opium into a bill of exchange in the first place. Every smaller trader still needs somewhere to store his cargo and someone to convert his silver. Increasingly, that means going through one of these two firms and paying for the privilege. William Jardine doesn't get rich because he personally outguesses the market on any given shipment. He gets rich because he owns the machinery every other shipment has to pass through. That's why he ends his career with a Dumfriesshire estate and a seat in the House of Commons, while an ordinary Calcutta agency partner from the 1829 crisis ends his in quiet liquidation. And it isn't only the British who work this out. In Bombay, a Parsi merchant named Jamsetji Jejibhoi starts with almost nothing. Early in his career, one of his ships is captured outright and he loses his entire stake in a single stroke. He rebuilds anyway, trading opium and cotton on the same Canton run, voyage after voyage, decade after decade. But the real shift comes when he stops just running his own cargo and starts financing everyone else's. He becomes the man other Parsi and Indian merchants borrow from to get their own opium to China. He's built the same lever as Jardine, just from the Bombay side of the ocean instead of the Canton side. By 1842, the year the war ends and the Canton system falls, Jejibhoi is knighted. He's the first Indian ever to receive the honor. And he spends a fortune built on opium funding hospitals, schools, and clean water works across Western India. Same trade, same lever, on 2 different continents. Completely different positions inside it compared to the men who only ever run cargo. So could you actually get rich owning a British opium trading house? As a small country trader, chasing the raw margin voyage by voyage, exposed to seizure and to Calcutta's credit cycles? It's possible, and plenty of men manage it. But it's also fragile, one bad season from ruin. As a partner in the machinery itself, controlling the receiving ships and the credit that turns Canton silver into a London fortune, then yes, unambiguously, spectacularly so. Jardine and Matheson prove it with a Scottish estate and an island apiece. Human is what the other side of that same ledger looks like. A lime pit. You were never in the drug trade. You were in the currency business.